apologize. I'm going to say it a few more just to make sure. I don't want people to think that I am singling you out to humiliate you or embarrass you. And more than likely, what's happening is that you're doing something that other people are doing as well. And I also apologize to all the people whose last name begins with like the early part of the alphabet, because that's usually where I do all of my notes. And by the time I get to the middle of the alphabet, I've already said everything I'm going to say. And so, but it's always the people. Yeah, Parker, sorry. I know, right?
I mean, I've been used to it since the beginning.
So I'm not the only one? Oh, good. Okay, that makes me feel that makes me feel a little better. So at any rate, I just want to go through a couple things really quick. I want everybody to look at this. I'm not only going to do this, but I also want to show you. I'm going to kill some of these lights. I also want to go through a little bit of developing. I was looking at some of your old stuff. I would say about a third of you are in pretty good command of your development in Adobe Camera Raw. About a third of you need help, and about a third of you need desperate help. Well, I didn't know another way to come up with that. So I'm going to go over, we're going to just develop a few things. We're going to do another few things. I'm actually, I think, possibly going to get you guys to do a couple of these with me, but we'll sort of see. So in the very beginning, I'm going to take a look at Carolyn's really quick. I just want to make sure pretty much everybody seems to be getting this smart object flow thing down a little bit, and then some not. So this is an image that came from Carolyn, and actually I thought these black and white, I thought the stuff that she had done was actually pretty terrific. But if you look at her smart object right here, you can see this thing is layered out as a 0. So if you double click on it to actually go into Camera Raw, you'll see that this is another smart object. So if you double click on that, it goes into yet again another smart object. And if you go into that, it is a regular thing. There is no raw data based in this. So you can see, remember, smart objects are these protective envelopes. And so you can see that these are all 3, 4 of those that have been pulled out of their envelopes. Does that sort of make sense, what's going on here? So nested smart objects actually do have a place, but the problem that I have with this is that the initial base is not based on raw data. There should be, once I drilled all the way down to the last one, I should have been able to see that raw data. So I just want to make sure everybody's good on that. We will go through that again. This is something about half of you guys are doing. So Shelby, you get to be the poster girl for it. Poster person. So if I take this and I launch this like this, you'll see that it is embedded as a ProPhoto RGB. However, once I get it open, it is in 16-bit. I can see that 16-bit right there. I can also see it down here. So it's fine. There's no reason. I mean, I don't have a problem with you doing that. It's just that your files are twice the size that they need to be. So again, if you want to stop this, because Shelby, you're coming straight from Lightroom into Photoshop, right? Yeah, I changed mine. Okay, I'm going to show it to everybody else so everybody else understands where that is. Again, at the end of the day, it's just they're big files. That's all. But like I say, at least half of this class did that. So I just want you guys to know. Because when I go to download your files, it takes twice as long. Actually running some filters on some of the stuff, updating smart objects. If you take your smart object back into Camera Raw and you reprocess it and bring it back in 16-bit was taking forever. But anyway, in Lightroom, under Preferences, under External Editing right here, you would change the color space from ProPhoto to Adobe RGB and the bit depth from 16 to 8. There's probably 3 or 4 of you who also managed to change the Adobe RGB part but did not change the 16-bit part, which is really a waste of space because your Adobe RGB is not that big of a space that it needs 16-bit really. And so you've got big files without taking advantage of any additional color. So I would not try to do that. Kim is not here either, which is unfortunate because she really could benefit, I think, from this. So, but you guys are going to benefit at it in place. So when I first looked at this image, and I'd seen the stuff on the board, and it wasn't, it didn't really stand out to me that much, but I want you to see what's going on here. Anybody see a problem with this file? How much noise could you possibly have in this image, right? So I was like, okay, well, maybe she's underexposed this thing before. So in a way, I used to have a teacher when I first started my photography career that deliberately reticulated all of his film, and it looked just like this. So anybody other than Broderick still doing black and white film processing in this town, in this group, in this class? So if you want to reticulate your film, if you actually really do want to reticulate it, the way you reticulate film is you start the developing process. You go ahead and do the stop part of it all, and then you shock your film. So you pour scalding hot water in it, 30 seconds, dump it out. Ice water into it, 30 seconds, dump it out. Hot water in it, 30 seconds, dump it out. You keep going back and forth like that. You hope you don't melt the emulsion off, so don't make the hot water too hot. But what it'll do is this. It'll actually cause all of the grain in your image to clump together. Anyway, that's called. So anyway, I was looking at this, and I double-clicked on it, and I was like looking here inside at her file. And again, if you zoom in tight on this guy, the sharpening that she had done on it accentuated it, but it's still, this is a train wreck. So there's two ways to try to combat this. The first way is actually here in Camera Raw, and it's the third of the little icons across the detail icon. There is noise reduction right here, and you can see she hasn't used it. But nonetheless, there's two types of noise. There is luminance noise. I'm going to zoom in here even more. Say what? Yeah, that's where we're going to get. That's where we're going to get. So, I mean, I know what the culprit is. So at any rate, you can see that by and large there is not a rainbowing of all these particles that are in here. So if you have luminance noise, which is what this is in large measure, it could be a combination of both. You can sit there and you can crank these things up, and what they do is they try to suppress the noise. Unfortunately, they also begin to suppress detail, which is what this slider right here is about. So it's this back and forth between how much you stomp on the luminance noise up here with the top slider, and then how much you try to recover the detail. And again, it's a sort of seesaw-y thing, a back and forth kind of thing. You can also, you'll see as we're doing this, we're flattening the image out. So they give you a contrast boost here to actually try to pump some of that back in. If it's color has always been knocked down some. It's on by default. But again, it would be the exact same issue right here in terms of how you basically would try to deal with it. This is the slider to go up to try to combat. But there's not a lot of color noise in this. When you see color noise looks like it looks like little rainbow particles. So you'll see red, greens, and blues, and it has this definite color element to it. Again, as you start to stomp on the noise, you lose detail, so this will actually pull the detail back. And then you can also, if you start getting too crunchy, for lack of a better way of putting this, you can try to actually use color smoothness. What color smoothness will do is it'll try to deal with the big fields and tend to stay away from the edges, so your image has the illusion of being better off. But the real issue is this right here. When she shot this image, she actually shot it at f4.5 at an 800th of a second at an ISO of 5600. Why, if we look at this image, why on earth? What about this image needs to be at an 800th of a second? Nothing. Nothing. There's no reason to have it at an 800th of a second, which is why she's got such a high ISO, right? So we went through reciprocity in this class before, didn't we? Equivalent exposures. Haven't we had that discussion here? All right, so you're gonna hear this on the video. You're not gonna see any change on the screen, but we are gonna have it again right now because I want to know what we could have done to fix this, what she could have done to actually have done a better shoot for this. So we're gonna start at an 800th of a second, and her ISO on this was 5600. 5600 is that what it was?
Yes.
5600. And she's at f4.5, I think. It's right on the screen up there. Yeah, she's at f4.5. Now, you can also see what lens she actually was shooting at. See this right here? She was shooting with an 18 to 55 millimeter lens at 26 millimeters. What shutter speed would she need to have to hand hold a 26 millimeter lens?
60.
The rule of thumb tends to be 1 over the length of your lens. So in this case, her lens is at 26 millimeters. So 1 over 26, or really 1 over 30, because you can't get a shutter speed of 26, should be adequate for her to hand hold that. But it's very same token, if you were shooting with a 200 millimeter lens, what would your shutter speed have to be to hand hold? 1 over 200, right? If you're shooting with a 500 millimeter lens, 1 over 500. If you're shooting with a 1,000 millimeter lens, exactly. You guys get this part? It's a rule of thumb, but it's a pretty safe rule of thumb. And if you actually add elements of stabilization to it, which most modern cameras have now, it gets even better. But that would still stick with that rule of thumb before you had to go on a tripod. So in her case, this is the shutter speed that she needed right here, was a 30th of a second. Make sense? So, what's the difference in stops between an 800th of a second and a 30th of a second? How would you figure it out? What is an f-stop? In terms of the amount of light.
Oh.
Doubling and halving, doubling and halving. I was substituting for a class the other day, and I said doubling and halving, and somebody said, I can't remember that, and I said, imagine that tattooed on my flat old man ass. And because it's the kind of thing, if you say things that, again, the way you try to memorize things, to keep memory, that kind of stuff, whatever, it's usually you build stories around it, and the grosser the story, the more absurd the story is, the easier it is to remember it. So I said, just have that image of me in your mind now forevermore, and you'll remember doubling and halving forever. And at the very end of the class, I said, so really quickly, f-stop. She goes, oh, doubling and halving. Okay, so doubling and halving. So if I'm going to cut the light in half from an 800th of a second, what would that be?
400.
A 400th of a second. And what would another stop down be?
200.
And another stop?
100.
And another stop?
60. Oh.
And another stop?
25th.
25th of a second, right? So for all practical purposes, it's going to be pretty close to this part right here. She may have to adjust her f-stop slightly, because that might be off a 1/6 of a stop, something like that. But for all practical purposes, it's right here. Does that sort of make sense? So how many stops is different? And if I'm going in this direction, am I adding light or losing light?
Adding.
I'm adding light. Slower shutter speeds, the shutter remains open longer, more light comes in, right? So how many stops? This is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 stops of light. So I've just added 5 stops of light, which means I don't need an ISO this high. I need to drop this ISO to balance this out. How much do I need to drop this ISO?
5.
5 stops, right? Because this is plus 5 stops right here. So if I subtract 5 stops from my ISO, my exposure should be the same thing, and it should look like that, except I'm nowhere near as noisy, right? We good on this? So, what's one stop down from 5600? 28. The next stop down? The next stop down? The next stop down?
350.
The next stop down? An ISO of 175 at a 30th of a second will give you that same exact exposure. Depth of field won't change. If her hair is blowing, you will get motion there. So you can adjust this part. But do you think you would have that noise at an ISO of 175?
No.
Not in a million years.
Does it show what time of day this happened?
I will show you this because that's actually another interesting call. I'll show you everything that I can find out about this file. So I'm going to cancel out of here because I don't want to change things here. I want to show you another thing to change. So to find out about this file, everything that would be available to us, if you come up to the File menu and you come down to File Info, this will work you through everything that is actually in there to be found. So you can see in the basic part, Kim doesn't copyright her pictures. Is that a problem? Sure it is. Well, especially a PJ person. Anyway, you should have that in there. So nonetheless, she doesn't have any of that in here. For her camera, she's shooting with a Nikon 3200. This again picks up the information where it was actually done. 26 millimeter lens and an 800th of a second at f4.5 ISO 5600. We can also tell that she actually has her camera set to spot metering. The origin, she doesn't have any information in here except for the date that's created. The IPC, this would be again, if you're, especially if you're a PJ person, this is where they use all that. This is dedicated, not dedicated. This, if you work for a newspaper, they would never let you get away with not having this in there. Yeah. The GPS stuff, she does not have GPS. That camera doesn't support it, or she hasn't put it in either way. And again, audio data. Why on earth would she use audio data? No, this is metadata. This isn't a recording. So does anybody in here ever shoot parties? That's how I started my career. It was actually when I first started to work for Playboy. I was an assistant there, and we shot all the parties. And it was really important to know who all the people were. So I have been to enough parties now as a guest, not as a shooter, but as a guest to see how the professional people do it. And so if you ever do find yourself getting into this, the way you do it is you take two pictures right off the bat, really quickly, one followed right after the other. Because the first one, people will know that you're actually getting ready to take the picture. And the second one, they will have let their guard down. And then you'll get a much better picture. But then immediately you put on this audio metadata and you walk right up to them and say, could you say and spell your name into my camera? And they do, and you know, oh, it is a thing. See, yeah.
That's so cool.
Yeah, it changes everything because it sits right here in the file data. So instead of you transcribing notes or any of that kind of shit, it's, yeah. Anyway, okay, so, and then again, there's not going to be any video data in here. She hasn't done anything with it yet. And that's actually how this thing was processed out. Anyway, I'm going to cancel that. I want to show you guys one other thing really quickly. How many people in here I did give you guys, Carolyn.
Oh, I have a question about the copywriting.
Yeah.
Would you need to copyright it if these images are just for clients?
The thing is,
I get it if you're posting online, but is anyone going to steal it?
no, and the thing is, because it's a really good question. Because for me, because to really enforce your copyright, you've also got to register it. It's not just enough to have it, right? And so for me, when I'm shooting Docker pants from the waist down, which I do a lot of, there's nothing I would ever copyright. If somebody wants to steal that and use it, have at it, right? The point being, though, is that copywriting that should be simply a template that sits either inside Lightroom for you or somewhere for you that is just automatically happening behind the scenes.
Oh, so it's like once you do it, it's like always going to be.
It should always be there. You change it once a year to update the date.
A lot of cameras you can set it inside the camera too. So
Exactly.
I just like, yeah, I'm like.
But that's the beauty of having that set it and forget it, and then everything will be tagged with it, and that it just makes you, because you're right. If you had to individually go in and tag every single one of these things, nobody would ever do it. And I would never suggest you do that. This is not about losing more time. But the Nik software suite, did I give that to you guys? How many of you have downloaded it? Okay, so the sharpening program that I showed you was one. However, in the same Nik collection, they have arguably one of the best noise reduction programs that there is, and it's this guy right here called Define, and it actually deals with smart objects, so it's going to do this as a smart filter. You can actually pick different points in here, and this thing will automatically analyze your image to try to suppress the noise as best it can. So I'm actually going to bring it up here in an area that I'm a little bit more concerned about, something that I want to actually hit it a little bit harder. You can see that there's a loop part over here. You can actually get another preview in here. You can move around. If you hover over this, you can see a before and after. Can you guys see that before and after?
Oh wow.
Yeah. Oh, wow is right. All right. So then I'm going to go ahead and say OK to this. You'll notice again once it runs through this guy, and you can, if the first pass of this doesn't work for you, or you don't feel like in this bigger version of it that it really helped, you can go right back into it because it is a smart filter, and double click on this and we'll come right back into the program itself, and you can start to work with the parameters here to actually try to build a greater or a stronger or a less if it went too far, blah 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 blah. Does that sort of make sense? But the difference in this, I'll show it to you on and off. Yeah. And unlike Photoshop, I think that this, it does a relatively good job. It strikes a good balance, I think. There's still a lot of noise in this, but there's also still all the detail in there. There's a number of things that are going on there. Does that sort of make sense to you guys? So again, that program's available to you guys, so I just wanted to show you that.
Where is that, Nick?
It's the entire suite to download. Again, this is the last version that Google published, and it was a Google product then, and it was free at Google. It's now a paid program with DxO, so if you use the old Google installer, it will still function in the current version of Photoshop. Nobody knows how long it'll last, but it will at least work in the current software. When you first run it, you will get a screen will come up and say, do you want to update? And if you say yes, it's going to take you to the DxO site, and you're going to have to pay for it. So I would suggest you just say later. But to find it, it is on our server, I hope.
So when you go to open it,
It is. So it's on our server.
so when you go to download it, like on your computer, you shouldn't click update.
No, when it's on your computer, you simply double-click and it'll install. It's when you actually run it the first time.
Okay.
And it's not just the first time. When you run it every time, it's a screen comes up and says, do you want to upgrade? And you say no. Or you say later. That's the version that they actually give you. So I'm going to hold off. I'm going to give you guys, I want to work with everybody on a couple of these files. So if I say I want to work on your file and you have an objection to that, just let me know and we won't work on your file. But I just wanted to mention that part. This is now going to get pretty picky in a way. And I just wanted to show you this one. So this was Parker's stuff. And I want to specifically look at the bike guy. Yeah. So you can see in Parker's stuff, when I look at this, I feel like this image is too cool. Well, that's a poor choice of terms, isn't it? It's really cool, but I think it's too cool. So how would you know if it was or if it wasn't? And if you felt like that, what would you do about it, or what could you do about it? I wouldn't trust auto white balance. This is what I would do instead. I'm going to double click on this to go into camera raw, because again, it was a smart object thing, but is there something in here I can actually white balance on? Say what? The what? The sign, exactly. One of the first things that I would actually go after. So I'm going to zoom into this guy and see. Now, there's some motion in here, so you can see that there's bleeding of this text because it's soft. Again, this I doubt he was trying to focus on this guy. But right in here in the center part, I feel like I can get a pretty clean, what should be a pretty clean white balance in there. So I'm going to click on this tool and click on the white balance, and you can see what a radical change that ultimately made in this guy. And I actually think that this is probably much closer to a legitimate white balance. So this is the difference. Now, Parker could actually argue that from an aesthetic point of view, he prefers this to be cold, which is fine. I get that. I wouldn't argue that. But I would also argue that this is, most people simply don't think about doing it. There was another place that I could white balance on this in this image. What would that be if the sign didn't exist? The flowers is a possibility, although the problem you get into with flowers is that they can actually have tint as well. So you can see that these guys right here have sort of a green tint to them, where the ones up on the top right here don't really have one. So if we white balance on this guy right here, it really pumps a lot of red in here, because yes, indeedy, that guy was not the thing to white balance on. So I'm going to hit Command Z to undo that. Other things I could do is to white balance in this image.
Where that like limestone white.
Oh, the bird shit all over this? I don't know. That's actually an interesting one. I have no idea if there's a tone or a tint to bird shit. Looks like it actually goes back to, you know, the cooler version. Any other and last things possible on this?
Black?
You can do black. It doesn't work as well.
Oh, that's zoom in though.
Why not?
Let's try. Let's see.
Let's try. So I just clicked on it. And this is where we were. Yeah, so it's giving me the same white balance as the one up here. So at any rate, I just wanted to point that part out. You're always looking for those things to actually do that. Hang on, we're going to reprocess this one together. So this is an interesting one. So Rosie, we need to talk about this guy. So when I open this guy up to begin with, what's the problem with this? Exactly, it's not a smart object, but that's one issue. Also, no sharpening on any of that, but what I was confused about was this. Why all the gradient maps? Oh, okay, because it's like 20 of them. Okay, just wanted you to know. Just wanted you to know. At any rate, if you turn all of these guys off, the easiest way to turn something off in Photoshop, if you got a lot of things to turn off, is hold down an Option key and click on the eyeball of what you want to keep on, and that'll turn everybody else off. And you can see in this case, she actually does still have, there is some color that's actually remained in this image, or I'm not sure how it got this far. My guess is that you did some of this in Lightroom first. I don't know. But again, these have not been brought in as smart objects, so I want to make sure that you're comfortable and understand that process, so we're going to do that again really quickly. But at any rate, just know, because some people use gradient maps to actually create black and white. But the black and white tool, the black and white adjustment layer right here, is actually probably a better way to go about doing that, unless you have a really specific set of mapping that you want to do. But at any rate, so this will give you the same thing. And the last thing I have that's just slightly problematic, but again, you are not the only person to do this, so I'm not like hammering on you, but it's this. What's the problem with this?
Wrong profile.
In what way? This is an sRGB profile, is what's embedded, so it's an extremely small space. It's thrown away about half of what your camera can actually capture, which is sad. Okay. Yeah, I'm going to show you something of Andy's really quickly. This was interesting because some of this stuff is, and I wrote this to most of you guys in the critique stuff that you actually had coming in. I'm simply going to do this one guy right here. So again, it's a pro photo image, but it's in 16 bits, which is fine. Again, it's bigger than it needs to be, but it's nonetheless, it's fine. But in Andy's here, you can see that what he's done is he's actually used a photo filter to slightly warm this stuff up. It's not doing a whole lot of warming though, so if I click on, oh, actually, this isn't one. I thought this was in one of his other ones. He's got that. So this is not actually doing a whole great amount of it, if anything, because I don't see, there's no real change in this guy, which doesn't really matter. But in looking at processing this image, when you look at it, and the print of this I thought was really beautiful, and when you look at this, it's sort of like, well, okay, again, there's enough abstract in this that you could say this is exactly what Andy wanted to do, and that's fine. But when I look at this stuff, I'm going to bring this into Camera Raw. There's a couple of things that I look at and that I go after in here. And the first one in this, again, was I would probably try to white balance this guy. What can I white balance on? Exactly. Not the ones that are reflecting, because this can actually put tint in them, but the ones that are the clouds that are at the top may actually change something. And when I click on that, you can actually see it puts a subtle amount of warmth into this, which, again, Andy may say, hey, I don't want that. I really want the colder, bluer part, but blah, 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 blah. But what I don't see happening in here is there's a very subtle set of adjustments. There's a minus a quarter of a stop in exposure and a small 0.3 or a 3-point bump in contrast. For me, I always click on auto. I just go after it and see what Photoshop decides they think looks the best. So for me, I like the fact that the clouds have actually been recovered here. But again, this is now, there's no right or wrong in this. This is an aesthetic thing, right? So I'm not telling you, Andy's may be like, the whole world loves what he has done and would look at what I'm doing and say, that is the ugliest fucking picture you've ever made. So I'm not trying to say that. I'm just pointing out how I approach these things so that you guys, so that I can pass that on, and then you guys can pick and choose and decide whether you want to use it or not. I've been doing this a really long time, so I'm hoping to show you guys a few tricks. So this would be the first one, would be to do this. The second one, and it's the thing a lot of you guys are missing, and it's this. It is clarity. So clarity again. What is clarity? Clarity is a mid-tone contrast. So you can see the things that these clouds are right here. If I just take the regular contrast slider and I push the contrast slider up, the whites burn out. That's not what I want to do in this. So I'm going to click on auto again to drop it back down. What I'm more interested in is getting separation of tone in the midtone so that I feel like I've got greater depth in the midtone so that the tones are not all similar. That is a clarity move. So if you take the clarity, I'm going to crank it all the way up. And you can see what it does to this glass right here. It really starts to pop that part open. Dehaze has been actually added. Dehaze also, if you guys, especially if you guys have an image that has got flare in it, this is what dehaze was actually designed to function, the way it was designed to function. However, it has other applications, and this could be possibly one of them. I'll show you the wrong thing first. If we go in this direction right here, it blows everything out. It actually introduces haze. But if we go in the opposite direction, you can actually see that this really starts to begin to pull in some serious separation in all the clouds, which I like. However, I think now that the image that I've done this, I find that the image is oppressively dark. I think it's overly dark. So there's no reason I have to accept the auto adjustment of minus 1.5 stops on this. I can come back in and I can actually readjust this guy to pull this guy back open to have some of that sort of lighter, airier feeling that actually Andy had going in his thing. So I'm going to go ahead and hit OK here and not. I would probably spend a little bit more time with it, but I'm not going to take it any further than this. I'm just, because I've showed you guys the issues that I want to show you. But over here in your history palette, to see a really quickly, if you want to see multiple stages of a file, if you click on the little camera that's at the bottom of your history palette, it'll create a snapshot for you of what your file looks like when you clicked on that little camera. If you say OK to that, it says it just built a snapshot right here. I'm going to click on that again, and you can see you can actually name things. So I would call this version, even though I can't spell. If I now go back to the beginning, this is what Andy's looked like in the beginning, and this is where I'm at right now. And again, I am not arguing necessarily. Personally, for me, I find this more compelling, but that doesn't mean I'm right. Does that sort of make sense, where we're going with this, guys? So it's, again, just something that I'm, especially the sliders that matter, or the things that matter the most, are white balancing, clicking on the auto thing, then doing your clarity and your dehazing work. Possibly, if you were really into it, we can actually also probably hit this with a little bit of vibrance. I think that makes the green, the glass down here too green, though, so I actually am going to pull that right back off because I don't like what that did. But nonetheless, go after those guys, and then anything in here that you want to then readjust. It's not like Photoshop. It's not like they own the world, or that well, they do own the world, but it's not like they have all the right answers. So you could go in and say, I don't think it should be down, exposed down like this, whatever. Or, wow, I do really like that. I think it should be way down here like this. And you guys get where this is going, right? So it's just a piece of information, and most people think that they either have to click on auto or default, and that's not how it works. All right, are we good on this? All right, so I'm going to cancel out of that. Almost done, guys. And we got a lot to get through today. I know, isn't that nice? Almost done, right? Okay, I want to look at Fifi's really quickly here. So there was some issues with this, and I'm just curious, why are all these tagged as recover? Do you know? Hello? Why are these all recover? It looks like something went horribly wrong and that all of this had to be recovered. Oh, okay. Fine. At any rate, I want to show you a couple things here. If I double click on this one to bring it into Photoshop, what's wrong with this? There are no smart objects in here. There is no raw data in here. So if I wanted to reprocess this, I can't. However, you've only had one, but you do have one in here that actually is done exactly right. This does have smart objects in it. So if I look at this one right down here, this is smart object. It's got the little icon in the bottom, and if I double click on it, this is your raw data, which is perfect. This is correct. I just curious why it's not in the other files. Make sense? Okay. Couple other things though that I want to show you about this guy as well. So this is where she starts in this. So I'm going to do the exact same process again. Is there something in this image that I can white balance? Skies skies can work for you, but they can also work against you. The whites on the building possibly would be one, but what about a white car? Probably a good legitimate one right here. So I'm going to grab the white balance tool and reset that, and we'll see what ended up happening. It may have already been pretty well balanced, so I'm just going to go back and forth. It put a little bit of warmth in it, not too much. But check what happens when I hit auto on this guy. Boom, you have a sky. A major sky. Then watch what happens when I hit clarity on this one. You've got a major sky with an alive building and depth. You've also opened up the entire area that's sitting underneath here. So I'm going to go ahead and hit OK to this guy. And I'm going to take a look at the difference. So you don't see any difference because there's another copy of the smart object sitting right above it, which I'm also not really sure why that's there. But nonetheless, when I turn that off and turn mine on, so this is where you were, nothing in the sky completely blown out. This is where I'm at right now. Make sense? Yeah. So anyway, guys, that's just all I can say. Auto button, auto button, auto button. Yeah, and then I'm going to show you one last one of John's. And this is, again, was a couple of people ran into this same issue, and I'm going to do it on this one just so that you guys can see. He did everything right. The smart object part is fine in here. That part is, I mean, he's clearly doing very active work in here, so I'm going to stick with his judgments as far as that part goes. I have no qualms about that part. What I have an issue with, though, is the sharpening layers. So take a look at this. I'm going to zoom in and try to look at an edge right here. This is his sharpening layer right here. To see the effect, because this has actually got a blending mode on it right now, it's impossible to see with all the other layers on. Again, hold down the Option key, click on the eyeball, and you can see that there are you can spot a few of the little edges in here, but it's extremely weak. Okay, so I'm going to show you how I would go about doing this really quickly. I'm going to turn this guy back on again. I'm going to simply copy it, and even though I've copied that the wrong way for a smart object, I'm going to rasterize this thing anyway, so it doesn't matter. Up to the layer menu, down to smart object, down to rasterize. This is no longer a smart object, so I can actually run the high pass filter on it. So up to filter, down to other, down to high pass. I'm going to hit it with a 1.1 high pass filter, and you can see what the real difference is. So this is what a properly high pass filter would be, and this is what yours was. And the difference on the image is from, again, to see this effect, the best thing to do is to use snapshots in history, because it's too hard to turn all these things on and off really quickly. So this is my version of the sharpening part. I'm going to, again, click on a snapshot and do Versor. By the way, these snapshots are not saved. If you close this file up, this whole history resets. It's not like not like Lightroom in that way. So I'm going to say OK to that. So this is my version of it right here, and this is your version of it right here. If we zoom back out slightly, not too much because we need to be able to see the whole thing. This is me, and that is you. It's really hard to see with this image. At any rate, wait, that's not what's happening here. Hang on. Oh, yeah, I'm sorry, that is. At any rate, the point that I'm trying to make in this is, remember, when you do that high pass, we're looking for a value between a 0.9 and a 1.1 is usually a good place to be. If you find that you're not really getting enough out of your image to do that, then you actually need to hit it a little bit harder. Okay, so I need everybody to start up Photoshop for me really quickly. I'm going to give you guys two files that I want to work on together with everybody. So I want to do it together. So I'm going to put it on the server. So in class projects on the server, in my folder, Engelhard, I'm going to find two files that I'm going to drag out for you guys. And Bridget, your second one was the bike guy, right? Yeah. Let's do the bike guy. What are we whispering for? Oh, because you're finished with that. I don't know how to save it. Okay. Are you only on your laptop, or are you on the big guy too?
I'm working on here.
Okay, I promise. Just leave him where he is, and we'll deal with it at during the break.
Sure.
Okay. All right, I don't want to make a copy of that. So it's one of Bridget's files right here. It's that EKIS underscore Bridget underscore 2.1 underscore 2.2, and then I'm also going to do one of Yesie's right here. So it's these two files. Hang on, I didn't get it far enough. It's these two files right here. They're right in the middle. So it's this one right here, EKS underscore Bridget, and then MELARA underscore. You guys got it. And we'll start with Bridget's file first. So if you can double click that, it is a PSD, so it'll go into Photoshop automatically. So, and Bridget did this as well. She was not the only person who did this. So there's probably like 3 or 4 of you guys did this. And so I'm thinking that somehow somebody somewhere taught you guys to use Smart Sharpen to actually do the sharpening for your prints. Nope.
I just didn't know how to do the nick thing.
Oh.
So I just guessed it said smart.
Okay.
It seems smart.
Okay. All right. This works. It actually does work if you zoom in and you actually take a look at this guy. So I'm going to zoom in here like this, and I'm going to uncheck the smart part, and then turn it back on again. It seems pretty light. However, it's a smart filter because she's doing it on a smart object. You can see it actually does put a little bit more edge in the helmet. If you click on it, double click on it, it'll open it up and you can actually see these are the settings that she actually put in. Again, one of the advantages of smart objects and smart filters is that all of that information is saved inside the file, and you can go in and you can continue to customize it. So if she did a print of this and felt like it wasn't sharp enough, she could change it. If she felt like it was too sharp, she could change it as well. The only downside to using Smart Sharpen is that it only functions on a single layer. So if she had, for instance, 2 or 3 layers of smart objects that she was reprocessing for different things. She was processing one for her base, one for her dodge layer, one for her burn layer. She would have to, again, she would ultimately, I guess, then have to put this Smart Sharpen filter on every single one of those layers to achieve it for the thing overall, which would be a colossal pain in the ass. So again, you would probably, if that was the case, you would probably want to do a merge stamp version of all of those at the top. Do we remember how to do merge stamp versions of things? Right? It's a command keyboard shortcut. So to show you what it's like, I need everybody to add a blank layer on top of this. I just clicked on the little layer guy. And I'm just going to show you what I'm talking about here. So if you, I'm double clicking on the hand to zoom back out. If on this blank layer, you hit the B key to get a brush, hit the D key to default your foreground and background colors to black and white. If white is your foreground color, hit the X key to make sure that black is the foreground color. So I'm just going to paint a black line on this blank empty layer. That's all I'm going to do. So with the B key selected, it's the brush tool. I'm just going to paint something like that so you guys can see what it is I'm talking about. With this now, if this was my image, this is my final image, I'm actually going to turn off the sharpening part right here. So it's not on, you don't see it. To merge these together in something that I could sharpen, you select the top layer. You always want to select the top layer before you do this, and then hold down the command key, which is just to the left of the space bar, the option key to the left of that, the shift key, and then the letter E for Engelhard. This was a thing that was named after me. No. And it's right here. You can see now that the layer that's sitting on top of this is a combination of all the visible layers. But I'm going to hit Command Z to undo that. I want to show you another thing here really quick. I want you to do another layer on top of that. And in this case, we're going to change our foreground color to red. So I'm going to click on the foreground color picker. It opens up. I'm going to type in 255 for R. That gives me a pure red, and I'm going to say OK to that. And now I'm going to actually paint some pure red on this guy as well. So I've basically got 3 layers here. I've got her original one here. I've got the one that's got the black line on it and the one that's got the red line on it. So now I'm going to do it wrong here. I'm actually going to click on the middle layer and do the same keyboard shortcut. Command, Option, Shift, and the letter E. And you see it does a merge stamp version of everything, but it puts it in the middle. It always puts it right above the layer that's actually active. This would not be where you would want to do this. So I'm going to hit Command Z to undo that. Instead, I'm going to select the top layer, Command, Option, Shift, E, and you will see that all 3 of those things have now been put together. You can see the bike, the red, and the black. I'm going to hit Command Z to undo that. And finally, I'm going to turn off the black layer visibility. You don't see it. It's off right now. I've still got the top layer that's got the red is active and highlighted. Command, Option, Shift, and the letter E. You'll see it leaves out the black layer because the black layer was not visible. So this move does a merged stamp of everything that's visible, and that's what you want to do because then this becomes your sharpening layer because this is the composite of all of the layers that you have been working on. Is this making sense? We good? All right. If you want to get back in history to the very beginning of this, scroll to the top of the history palette and simply click on the little icon that is where Bridget's file was, and we're good to go. So we're going to actually start here. I'm going to double click on this image icon itself. It is a smart object. It was based on raw data. I'm going to come back in here, and from this point, looking at this, how would you guys, what would be your next move? White balance. So I'm going to click the white balance tool at the top. What can I white balance on? I can try a shirt. Again, sometimes the shirt, you guys know, does anybody in this room use that blue laundry detergent that's like liquid? Whisk is a really famous example of it. Nobody uses that stuff anymore.
Oh, is it like blue with white powder in it?
Oh, that's also another one. It can be powder that's got little blue specks in it. Anybody use that stuff? Yeah, everybody, because it makes your shit brighter, right? The problem with this is, and this is going to matter to you guys, so you really need to pay attention to this one. The problem with that blue stuff is this, is the way it works is that there's the visible light spectrum, right? Roy G. Biv. We all learned that, right? So red, green, blue, indigo, blue, violet, yellow, right? Or, you know, yeah, whatever Roy G. Biv stands for, right? I mean, I could actually do that part, right? So just beyond visible light, where violet is in the electromagnetic spectrum, you have UV light. UV light is not visible to the human eye. You can't see it. But what that blue dye does, the blue little crystals and the blue liquid, is it puts a dye in your clothes that actually bends that UV light and brings it into the visible spectrum, and you see it as brightness. You see it as extra light. So for instance, how many people in here have ever seen a fluorescent poster? All of us, right? Why does it glow? Exactly because of that. There is a dye in the poster, or anything that actually glows like that. There's a dye in it that actually takes UV light that you should not be seeing, and it brings it right into the spectrum. It actually gives you more violet light as well, but nonetheless, but there's more energy coming off of it than there should be, and you perceive it as brightness. Why does this matter to you guys? Well, that shirt could actually have this that could be happening to it, so that makes it a liability. But even more importantly, how many people in this room have any photography gear at all? Right? Any of you guys have an umbrella? Yeah, a little white umbrella, right? Or a scrim, or anything that you use in front of a flash or a light to soften that light up, right? They get dirty, so you decide you're going to throw it in the laundry to actually clean it. And you want it brighter, because there you go, right? So you put in your whisk or your Tide with little blue crystals, whatever. It then dyes that with a UV bender, and you've just lost your umbrella. You won't be able to use it. Does that matter to you guys? Yeah, a little bit. Slightly? Okay. So, I know, right? All right, so anyway, I'm not going to do his shirt. I'm actually going to go after the bus. And I'm clicked on the bus, and you can see here the difference that is actually extremely slight. In this, it looks like it pulls a little, yeah, it pulls a little of the green out. There was a little bit of green that was still left in here. However, what's my next move? Auto. So I'm going to click on auto and see what Photoshop thinks I should do. And it wants to brighten things up. And I'm okay with that a little bit. I'm not necessarily totally in love with it, but I've got other things to go, and I want to see what they do first. So what's my next move? Clarity. So I'm going to grab clarity, and I'm going to start to crank it up. Now, you can go too far. Certain images, so for instance, if you go all the way up to 100, this guy, it looks real. It looks like the very worst of HDR photography. It's just awful, right? So some images take more than others, whatever. So I'm going to actually start here and bump it up a little bit and sort of see where I feel comfortable about it. And I'm getting up kind of around the 30s, low 30s is where I think that this starts to begin to feel a little bit better. Is there anything else that you would actually consider doing to this image? The vibrance got kicked up when you actually hit auto. If you feel like you really want that helmet to be a little bit more of the star, you can actually hit it a little bit harder. If you feel like the helmet is too much of a star right now, you can actually pull it in a negative direction to flatten that out a little bit. but I'm going to actually take it up and leave it probably about where it was. So it was kind of right in the mid-teens. This part's actually looking relatively good for me. But the last thing that I'm going to do with this, and again, some of the people I know, John does this a lot on his stuff, and I think it's actually really brilliant. People who print in the darkroom, this is like a standard process for printing in the darkroom. Weren't you always taught to burn in the corners? Everybody. Well, what is burning in the corners really? It's a vignette. So if you click on the thing that looks like this thing it's an FX, it sits right in the middle of the top panel here. If you click on that, there's a vignette cropping tool that's in here, and you can actually kick this guy down a little bit. So I pulled mine down to about a -28. There's all sorts of controls that you can do with this cropping tool. You can shift midpoints, roundness, the feathering of it. You can actually do negative vignettes and positive vignettes. So if you go in the other direction, it actually lightens the corners up. But I'm going to actually pull mine down a little bit. And not in like an overt, obvious way, but just enough like this. I'm going to go ahead and say OK to that. And then I'm going to snapshot this guy as well. And you can see how long this is taking to do. That's because this is a 16-bit file. So over in the history palette, click on the history thing, snapshot, and call it version 2. And say OK. And then if you click back at the very top one, this is what Bridget started with. This was her version of it. This is where I'm at right now. And again, I'm not trying to argue that this is better or right or wrong. I'm simply showing you the way I would actually go about doing this part of it. And then you can sort of answer that for yourself. Last thing we're going to do really quickly, guys, and then we're going to take pictures tonight. Okay, is the Yessy's file that's on here. So it's the other one you should have copied over. And it's the one of the house. Is that the one I gave you? No, I gave you, did I give you this one? Oh, that's, yeah, I gave you the right one then. Yeah, sorry. Okay, also done correctly. You can see she does color work here. Which again, I think some people, about a quarter of you guys, 30 of you guys, whatever, we're doing all of your color work using curves and stuff here in Photoshop. It's okay, but it's better to actually do it in Camera Raw. So for instance, if I look at this right here, she's doing some color balancing right here. There's not really an equivalent of this in Camera Raw. I mean, she can get the same things. This isn't something that I work with a whole lot. The curve thing that's right here is something that you could have done in Camera Raw, because this curve thing right here is basically just a tonal curve. It's a slight darkening of the midtones is what's going on here. But nonetheless, I'm going to double click on the house. It's going to actually open this guy up. What's my first move? White balance. What can I white balance on in this image? I'm going to go with the garage. It's funny. If you look at the eave here, there is a shadow underneath the eave that indeed should be, because I think the trim in the house is white. But the problem that you run into with shadows is that they tend to be, the light that is in shadows tends to be more blue. So you'll see if you click on the garage, it sort of warms things up a little bit. There are other places that you could click, though, that'll actually completely change that. So if you click on the shadow that's underneath the eave, it puts a lot more, it's now much bluer. If you click on the house that's across the street, it actually puts more green in it. And then back to the garage. The garage for me was the most pleasant of these. So that's what I'm going to go with. What's my next move? Auto. So I'm going to click on auto, and you can see here that it starts to bring the clouds in, or the sky in, considerably more, because they were pretty burnt out. I think it makes the house actually too dark. So this leads me to believe that I'm going to need to fix this using 2 different versions of this file as opposed to just one. But before I go there any further, I am actually going to go, what will my next move be? First off, I think that this is a little too dark, so I'm going to zero the exposure back out. I'm going to pull the exposure back up. I'm going to leave the other settings like they are. I'm going to leave the highlight, contrast, all that the way it is. Next move. Clarity. So I'm going to grab the clarity slider and start to pop this up. And you can see it really has an impact on this image because a lot of this is mid-tone. So that's what we're actually dealing with here. And then Vibrance, I'm going to actually go after that as well. I'm going to hit this a little bit harder to see if I feel like that makes the house seem a little bit more the way I would imagine the house to be. So that may be a little hard. So I'm up around mid-30s. That's kind of where I'm actually feeling better about this house part. So I'm going to go ahead and say okay to that. Now, this image right now still has both of those color corrections on them, so I'm going to turn both of those off. So this is my current version of the house right here. Again, I'm going to snapshot this. So over, click on the little camera part, and I'm going to call it as Verser 1, and say okay to that. And then again, I'm going to go back and forth between the two and look. What do you guys think? Again, I can't argue that for me, this is more the way I would process this file. That doesn't mean that that's the only way to process this file, but this seems to me to have greater depth to it. It's more dynamic. The color seems to me to be better. I'm still not happy about the sky. So what could I do about the sky? So how would I mask the sky? Say what? Quick selection tool is going to be tough. So if you grab the quick selection tool and you try to go after this, this is really going to be difficult to get between all the leaves here. So I need everybody to do this with me because I don't think we've actually done this. I could be wrong, but I don't think we've done this. Have we used color range in this class? Okay, well, we're going to do it right now. So with this active and selected, I need everybody to come up to the select menu and come down to color range. And when you get to color range, I'm going to drag this dialog box and kick it to the side here for a second. We need to look at a couple of different things in here. When yours comes up, you have a small preview right here, which is showing you the initial selection. Yours may look different than mine.
Where did you get to color range?
Select menu, down to color range. So again, this guy comes up. Now, my screen, my image, the bigger part is the same as my preview. If you want to see the bigger part to look the same, you're right now on this drop-down menu. You guys are on none. Click on the drop-down menu here and come down to grayscale. This will actually show you, this is the mask that's actually going to be built. So again, in a mask, what happens where we see white? White does what in a mask? White does what in a mask?
Reveal.
Exactly. White reveals, black conceals, right? So if I were to use this mask right here, right now, and I did some change. So let's say I made it really red. The sky would turn really red. Some of the trim on the house would turn really red. But the street, nothing would change. The car, very little would change. The house, nothing would change because it's all black.
How come your street is black?
It may be depending on just what we've picked here, so don't worry.
Oh.
I'll get you to the same place as I am. I just want to show you a couple other things first. If you come up to the Select drop-down menu, click on this drop-down menu, you will see in this you have the option to select the primaries and the secondaries, either reds, greens, and blues, or cyan, magentas, and yellows. You also have an option to select highlights, midtones, and shadows. I'm going to select highlights right here to see what it does. And you'll see that it believes that all of these things are highlights, which is way, way, way worse for me. However, there is a range slider that sits right here. It's this guy right here. And right now that range is set too high for me. Yours may look different because your range number may be different. If you click on this range and start to drag up, it's saying that you're actually saying, I want more of these things to be highlights. But if you move in the opposite direction, it starts to choke that part down. And as I get down here into this area down in here, it seems like it's trying to do a better job, but it's really fucking up these trees in here. So I'm going to say, no, this isn't what I actually want to do. Finally, in this drop-down slider, if we did have skin tones in here, the skin tone thing is primarily was put in here for people who shoot people. I don't think it does a really good job of anything, so I'm going to say let's forget that too. Instead, I'm going to go up to the top and do the sampled colors. This is primarily where I work all the time. Now, your image may look completely different than mine. You'll notice that there's 3 little eyedroppers right here. One is the initial selection tool. So if you click on that very first one, come over to the sky and simply click once, your image should look something similar to mine. However, this fuzziness slider will also control What the fuzziness slider does is it says, how far away from the tone you picked do you want this selection to go? So as you start to drag it up, you'll see that it starts to get in tones that are further and further and further away from my image. I'm going to ask you guys to leave that fuzziness at 32. That's what the actual default is. However, I want to add areas to the sky that are not on here. You can see there's areas of the sky right under here near the tree that are not involved in this at all, and I want them to be involved in this. So if you click on the same tool that you've got and you click on that other area, it selects those areas, but it deselects the ones that you initially had. So in this case, what we need to do is we actually need to add to a selection. So it's not an either or. This is like using the shift key for our selection tools. It's this right here. It's the eyedropper that's got the little plus in the middle. If you click on him, now every place that you click, it will actually add that to your to the image that you've actually got going. I'm going to go really bold here, and so that actually part worked out pretty good. I feel pretty good about this. You can actually use this tool to click and drag, and it will actually expand that selection quite a bit. I'm going to go after this last little bit of cloud that's in the lower right-hand side of my guy right here. I'm going to click on that, and it actually brings in that part, but it also brings in a lot of the building. It brings in all the rest of the trim. So I'm going to hit Command-Z to undo that because I feel like this is a better thing to begin with. Are your image looking sort of like mine? Everybody's? Everybody who's doing this? Sort of. Everybody who's not doing this, you're going to regret that. And I'm going to say, okay. You'll see now that you've got a set of marching ants on here. This has actually built a selection, but we need to work with it. We need to modify it. So to work with this selection, you need to save it. To save a selection, you go up to the Select menu, down to Save Selection, and I'm going to call this Sky with 2 S's. No, just 1 S. I'm going to call this Sky, and I'm simply going to say OK. You've still got an active selection going. You can see you've got the marching ants. If you hit Command-D, they go away. So what did we just do? We just built a selection and we actually saved it. Where are selections saved? In the channels palette. So if you come over to your channels palette, click on the scroll bar and drag down to the bottom, you will see down at the bottom there's this thing called Sky, and it should look like what we just built. If you click on it, you have actually selected it and you can work on it. So I'm going to double click on the hand to get this guy to get as big as it can go. I'm going to hit the B key to get a brush. In my drop down menu here for my options, I'm going to make this about a medium hard brush. I want something that's got a little bit of a soft edge, but I want pretty good control. I don't want to be spraying anything out into the rest of this sky area out in here. So I'm leaving it at about a 50%. I'm going to click on the name Adobe to get that to fly away. I've got a normal blending mode for the brush, opacity at 100%, and flow at 100%. To make your brush a little bit bigger or smaller, I use the bracket keys just to the right of the P key. The one immediately to the right of the P key makes your brush smaller. The one to the right of that makes it larger. So I'm going to get something about this size because I'm not sure if my foreground and background color are defaulted to black and white. To make sure, I'm going to hit the D key really quick. But now I need to paint with black. Right now, white is my foreground color, so I'm going to hit the X key to get black as my foreground color, and then I'm simply going to paint out all of this that is not sky. You want to stay away from the sky part as best you can. I'm not going to get too crazy about a lot of the detail that's up at the very top. If some of that gets made darker because of this, it's not going to be the end of the world. I'll get my brush a little bit smaller and click and paint that part out. Get rid of the trim right here. Get rid of all of this down here. So I've got a pretty good line that's going around my image right now. To get the rest of this, look up at my screen really quick, guys. I've got solid black line that goes from here all the way around my image. So I'm going to hit the L key to get a lasso, and I'm going to simply click and drag through this area to select everything else. You could paint the whole rest of this out, but it's just easier to make that selection like that. And then did we go over filling using Option and Command and the Delete key in this class yet? If you want to fill using your foreground color, you hold down the Option key and you hit Delete. Because my foreground color was black, it just filled it with black. I'm going to hit Command Z to undo that. If you want to fill it with the background color, you hold down Command and hit Delete. The relationship of the Command and the Option key always denote foreground and background. Option, because Option is always to the left and foreground is always to the left, will always be your foreground color. The Command key, which is always to the right, lines up exactly with the background color, which is always to the right as well. So I'm going to Command Z again as well. So Option Delete will fill that. If you cannot remember that keyboard shortcut, you come up to the Edit menu, down to Fill, and under Fill, you have a drop-down menu, and you can say you want to fill with black, 50% gray, white, or foreground color, background color, or the color picker actually here, either one. But in this case, I don't need to do that because it's already black. Command D to deselect. This is a luminosity mask. I'm not quite finished. I'm going to hit the B key to get a brush again. I'm going to hit the X key to get white as my foreground color, and I'm going to paint out that little cloud area that was right there. Now this seems to me to be actually a pretty good mask of this, something that you would never get with either the Magic Wand or the Magic Wand might get closer to this, but the Quick Selection tool would never do this. So we are going to use this tool now. I'm going to go back up to the top. I'm going to make RGB active again. I'm going to then come over here to my Smart Object. Now there is a right way and a wrong way to make this Smart Object, because again, if I simply click and drag this guy down and make a copy of it that way, what's the problem with this? The problem with this is that these are two references to one set of data. This is a true clone. So to see what I mean by that, double click on the Smart Object you just made by copying that way. Grab the exposure slider and drag it all the way down until you have an almost black image and say OK. You'll see it changes this Smart Object, but it also changes the one underneath because these two layers are referencing the exact same material that's in one envelope. It's just two views of the same thing. Does that make sense? So I'm going to hit Command Z to undo that. I'm going to throw the second Smart Object away. And instead of copying this or making a copy that way, the only way to do one to divorce it, to break that link between the two, is to come up to the Layer menu, down to Smart Objects, down to New Smart Object via Copy. We have gone through that in this class, haven't we? Okay. It looks like the exact same thing has happened. We've actually got a new Smart. It looks like it's identical. I wish there were a way that it would indicate the difference, but there isn't. Anyway, if you double click on this guy now, same thing, drag the exposure slider all the way down, make your image almost black, say OK. What you'll notice is that the one that we just made that way actually did change, but the one that's underneath is still the exact same way that we had it before. So now I've got two sets of raw data that I can process separately. So that's going to be my plan in all of this guy. Ironically, if we look at this right now, we've got a lot more going on in the sky. I don't really necessarily have a lot of separation in there, so I'm going to work on this a little bit more. I'm going to double click on this to go back into Camera Raw. And again, you've got to ignore the rest of the image. This is all just about the sky. So in the sky, I could say, well, you know, that seems a little dark. That's a 5-stop underexposure. But first off, I'm going to see what really cranking up clarity does on this guy to see if I can't get more contrast there. I'm also going to hit this with the contrast slider. I'm going to grab him, and I'm really going to pop that guy up. And you'll see it's just making my sky too black because the sky, there's too many tones in here that are already too dark, so it's pushing everybody to make everybody darker here. I'm going to click on Auto and see what Auto brings to the party, and Auto's not going to do anything for me here. So I'm going to drag, I'm going to pull the exposure down. I'm down around 4 stops. It gives me sort of a stormy, kind of foreboding sort of type sky in here. Again, clarity is all the way up. I'm going to also see what dehaze, a change of dehaze does in this. It makes it just a little bit more dramatic. I'm going to go with this the way it is right now. We'll just see what ultimately ends up happening. And I'm going to say OK to this. So if you want the same figures that I've got, I'm about 3.5 stops under. My contrast is down to a -17. My highlights are down to a minus 71. My shadows are at a plus 37. My whites are at a plus 7. Blacks are at a minus 11. And clarity is cranked all the way up. And I'm going to say OK to that. So it makes for a very dark image here. But again, now I'm going to mask it. So to use the mask, come over to your channels palette. Hover over the icon. You don't hover over the name. You don't click on this. If you click on it, you're now working on that channel again, which is not what I want to be doing. I want to be working on my RGB image on this guy that's right here. So hover over the icon of it, hold down the Command key and click, and it will load it as a selection. If you cannot remember that, the other way to get there, I'm going to hit Command D to deselect. The other way to get there is up to the Select menu, down to Load Selection, and in the drop-down menu right here, you'll have Sky, and say OK. And then finally, with your smart object for the sky processed, click on, make sure it is active, and then click on the little icon at the bottom that's the rectangle with a hole in it. That's the Add Layer Mask. Now, this makes it very, very, very dramatic. So, and a lot of people would argue that it's too dramatic. So you could go back in and reprocess the data here. But a simpler way to deal with this is to simply drop the opacity of this layer. So I'm going to click on the opacity and I'm going to start to drag it back till I have what I consider to be something more in the sky than was actually there before. It doesn't need to be a ton. So this is what I brought back into it. And that seems to me to feel slightly better. I feel like now looking at that my house is a little too bright. So I'm going to double click on the house. I'm actually going to pop the clarity slider a little harder, and I'm going to drop the exposure down a little bit more to guts it up a little bit, and then I'm going to say OK to that. Then I'm going to snapshot this. Coming over to the history palette, click on snapshot. I'll call it Verser again. Say OK to that. Go all the way up to the top of the history palette, and we'll look at where things started and where we are. Huh. Are there questions about this? Okay. We can close that guy up. You don't need to save it. That part's done. Final projects. One of the assignments today, if you go, actually, I need everybody to take a look at our website really quickly. So one of the assignments, can you believe we're in the 5th week already? Say what? Isn't it? Does it seem like it went really quick, or does it seem like it's going slow? Yeah. Like really quick, right? Scary quick. Okay, so anyway, I need everybody to click on this assignment 5.1, write a first draft of your final project. All of this is, I'm asking for 2 paragraphs in this. This will explain it pretty well. I need you to start thinking about your final project now. So I'm going to turn on a little bit of light in here just so that I can see you guys. But with your final project, this does not mean that it cannot evolve from whatever it is you're writing in this that's due in 2 weeks. So this is not due next week. I think if you look down at the bottom of it, the due date is 2 weeks from now, which would put it kind of in the middle of October. October 10th. So is that next week? Yeah. Okay, I'll change that. Isn't that sweet of me? Now see, I told you it was due in the middle of October, right? So at any rate, what I want you to do, the first paragraph talks about what you want to do. The second paragraph just talks about how you're going to do it. Okay? I need you guys to start thinking now about what you're going to do for your final project for this class. So in thinking about that, what ultimately is going to come out of this is that I'm hoping that you guys do your own personal work for this class. There is no reason to pick a project that you think is photo practice 3-like. I want it to be your work, but I'm hoping that you will use the tools and the stuff that we've learned in this class, the things that we've talked about in this class. Does that make sense? So again, it would obviously be smart object workflow. It would obviously be color corrected. It would obviously be sharpened prints, blah, 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 the whole 9 yards. But I want this to be something that you can use. I don't want this to just be a throwaway for you. Does that make sense? Also, I want you to know it can evolve, but I need you to think about it now, because if you wait until the 14th week of the semester and decide you're going to do your final project in 2 weeks, you're fucked. I don't want that to happen. We will, at the end of this, when we get into like week 10 and 11, you will actually be bringing in working files, stuff that you're working on. It usually starts with swipes or tear sheets or working files, stuff that you've shot, stuff with your phone, stuff that you've torn out of magazines, stuff that you get from Pinterest or Google Images. That's how the process sort of starts. Then once you guys start shooting, you'll actually show some work, get some feedback on it, so that hopefully that process of 4 to 5 weeks will lead you to something that's really exceptional in your final project. Does that make sense, Carolyn?
Are you gonna use like a rubric or something?
No.
So like, do you have like a certain criteria of how like
You can.
what you use in like editing the pictures? Like
No. I want compelling work. That's all I care about.
okay, so I was just kind of like, oh, you have to do like X amount of like editing.
No.
As far as,
No, I don't look at it that way at all. What I'd look at it is I will go in and, again, I look at the files. So what I'll go in is I want it to start off and be compelling to begin with. That part I want, right? But then I also want to know that you're actually doing it in a way that is uses, again, the workflows that we've set up in here and gone through that. It's got to be smart objects. It's got to be color corrected. It's got to be non-destructive. It's got to be all of those things, right? Things need to be in order, make sense, all of that sort of stuff. So that's what it needs to be. That's the part that I'm more concerned about. But by the very nature of this, Photoshop will let you pretty much do anything. So there's no way for me to really say that, oh yeah, you need to do this, this, and this. It wouldn't make a difference.
right.
Okay. All right. So I just wanted to make sure that everybody was aware that that's something that you're going to have to tackle. Let me see what else we're looking at. So you should have shot your topology last week. That's actually due tonight. Is everybody comfortable with how you actually export a catalog and put it on Moodle? This will be the 3rd time we've done it. Are there any questions about that? We good on that? Everybody good on that? Okay, if you're not good on that, go back to our very first class, look at the video. I walk you through the whole process in the very beginning. Let's see, reframing topology, you should have read that. I'm asking you to do the summary on that. That's actually due tonight. And then the rest of this is reading, videos. There was also an assignment to complete the select and mask practice file. Did we actually go over this in class by any chance? Did we ever go over select and mask in this class? No? Okay, well then we're going to do it right now, and it will be the assignment. And if you've already turned yours in, or you screwed it up or did whatever, you can just, I don't know if you can resubmit another assignment on. Okay, well, so we're going to do it right now. And so if you guys all turn it in right now, you'll all get 100 on it right now. And I do this in my retouching class, and I cannot fucking believe this. A third of my retouching class does not turn the goddamn files in. It's like, we just did it. All you need to do is plug it in. That's all you need to do. Oh, really? I didn't think it was... Yeah, anyway, and it happens every year. And it drives me out of my mind. All right, so if you click on this select and mask thing, it'll open up. If you click on the actual, there's a link to the file right here. If you click on that guy, it'll offer to save this thing for you, and you just need to save it to your desktop. Once it's saved to your desktop, you can, I think, launch it just by clicking on the link that's at the very bottom. I'm in Chrome, though, so if you guys are doing this in a different browser, it may not work that way. It just opens it up in Photoshop automatically. Yeah, and if you're going to get this profile mismatch warning, don't worry about it. We'll just say it's an sRGB guy. But you should end up with a file that's actually got 2 layers here. So who does not have this open? We all good on this? Okay, if you turn off the eyeball of the girl on the top, you'll see that there's a beach behind it. If you turn her back on, then that's what's going on. To use the Select and Mask workspace, which is it's a thing that's evolved from an old tool. Did anybody in the older days use the Refine Edge tool? So, just Emma, that's the only person. Did you like it? Okay, you can still get to it. So for those of you who don't know about it, it doesn't matter, but for Emma's benefit right here, to get to it, instead, if you come up to the Select menu and you hold down the Shift key and come down and pick Select and Mask, it will take you right into the Select and Mask workspace. Try and hold down the Shift key first, and then go after Select menu and Select and Mask. Takes you right back in there as well. Cancel out of that. Build a selection first. Click on the quick selection tool, select just a little bit of this girl's face, and then hold down the Shift key and come up to Select and Mask, and it brings you into Refine Edge, and this is the old tool. So if you really prefer the old tool and you want to get back to it, that's how you do it. I'm going to cancel out of this. I am going to deselect and then show you guys probably the advanced version of all of that. This is what that tool has evolved into. First off, I'm going to double click on the hand to recenter this inside of my workspace. And then to get to the Select and Mask tool, select the top layer, the one that says hair, come up to the Select menu and come down to Select and Mask. And what will happen is that this will actually come into its own workspace. This is now, we've sort of left Photoshop. We're in a completely different workspace. I'm going to click and drag this guy over and recenter it. If your image, does everybody's image look like this? Okay, so you sort of see, yeah, what's yours look like? Just the beach. Then click on the View menu, this drop-down menu right here. So everybody look at my screen because you all need to know about this as well. You need to make sure that you're on the onion skin. Okay? And then in this transparency slider, you need that set at 50%. If you take your transparency slider and you take it all the way to 100%, you see the beach. If you go all the way to 0%, you only see the girl. What we're looking for is we want to be able to see both at the same time. This is the big evolution of this program, because the problem that's existed in all of these select and refine spaces is that you were never sure of what you had actually selected or what was missing. Does that sort of make sense? So that's why they do it this way right now. So this set like this, if you look at the tool set that exists over here on the left, there's 5 tools that are over here. The 2 at the bottom are exactly the same way they work in Photoshop. They're the hand that lets you move around, and they're the magnifying glass that lets you zoom in and out. The tool here that looks like a lasso is exactly the lasso tool. It allows you to actually go in. Well, everybody pick the lasso tool really quick and just select something right around like this girl's ear. And you can see it makes a selection, but you also see a change now in opacity. This is how it indicates to you that this is now part of your selection. Does this start to make sense? And that's why this tool has the onion skin. That's why this whole thing was invented, was to actually do that. I'm going to hit Command-Z to undo that because we're going to use other tools that are actually better. The next tool that's up, I'm going again from the bottom up, is a conventional paintbrush. If you click on it, you will see that you actually have a drop-down menu up here at the top that will allow you to control the size of your brush and the hardness of your brush. It works just like the paintbrush does in Photoshop. If you click and paint with this guy, it'll actually put that into your selection. If you click on the minus tool, the minus version of that, and paint, it subtracts things from your selection. If you hit Command-Z once, it goes back, but if you hit Command-Z again, just like in Photoshop, it simply keeps toggling back and forth between those 2 states. To actually go all the way back, hold down Command-Option and hit Z, and it will step you back through the whole process till we get back to kind of the beginning. I'm going to skip the next tool that's in the middle because that's what we're going to finish up with, and go to the one at the very top. The one at the very top is a version of the quick selection tool. And this, again, is different than it existed in the old Refine Edge. Now remember, using the quick selection tool, because we have talked about that in this class, you want the quick selection tool to find the edge for you. So you can't cross the edge. So I'm going to select the girl, but if I drag this tool across this area where it's part girl, part beach, it will not find that edge of the girl. You need to keep the tool inside the boundaries of the girl. And you also can't cross up here into the sky. You have to avoid that part. So I'm going to start in this area that's in the top part of her hair, but I'm going to stay away from this edge. I'm not going to touch any of that because that'll throw the whole selection up into the sky as well. So I'm going to click and I'm going to start to drag around and I'm going to just work my way back. Again, it's a tool that's basically built on artificial intelligence. It began to understand what I was really trying to select in this. It got the rest of the girl, and things are looking pretty good. However, I have a problem. And the problem that I've got is this, is that there's hair here in the sky that didn't get selected, and there's also background here that did get selected. I need to fix that, and that's the next tool down. It's this one right here in the middle. This is the Refine Edge tool, and this was the tool that was actually used in the Refine Edge tool that I just showed you, the old one. And what this tool does is perfect for things like these hairs. So what you want to do, you don't want to use this tool any place that you don't need help. I need help in this hair up here. I don't need help in her profile or down here along her chest. So don't use this tool there. So I'm going to deal with this area that's up in here, and I'm simply going to click and paint in this area up in here and cover that whole part of her area right here for her hair. And it actually does a reasonably good job of getting rid of old background and still keeping her hair. This area right here, none of this hair is selected. To show you what is selected, come over here to your drop-down view menu, click on this, and come down to on white. And this will show you what your selection actually looks like. And you can see all of those hairs are missing. You can also see that there's background contamination in all of this. You can also see there's stuff that's missing in the background right here. So again, I'm going to go back up to the onion skin, and using the Refine Edge tool, I'm going to click and paint across all of those hairs right there. I'm also going to click and paint through all the hair right here to try to get rid of that background. And then again, it's hard to tell, but these wisps of hair that are here in the back, they're not part of your selection. Again, to see what is part of your selection, click on your drop-down menu, look at it on white, and you can see that this area is gone. Now, you know it's there, so you can actually use this tool to paint while you're on this view in white area. So this is now my new sort of selection. I'm going to go back to the onion skin. There's nothing else that I'm actually missing in this. However, I want to see what this composite really is going to look like before I ultimately say okay. To do that, in the View menu drop-down, come down to On Layers. It's the one almost at the very bottom. And when you click on Layers, what this will now show you is what your composite will look like if indeed you use this guy. So I'm going to click over here to get that drop-down menu to go out of the way. Edge detection, we don't need to do edge detection because we've already just painted it in. To see what we just painted in, click on Show Edge. This will now show you what we have painted in. The way that the radius tool, the Refine Radius tool works is that you tell Photoshop where you want to run this very special piece of software. There's no strength slider in this. There's no multiple passes at this. There's no do it again. All you can do is either on or off. You're either running it or you're not running it, and where do you do it? And by clicking on Show Edge, this will show you where we're running it. I'm spotting a problem in mine right here, and you can see there's part of that Refine Edge that got missed right here. So I'm going to click and drag across that. There's probably another part that's right in here that also got missed. I'm going to click and drag through that. And the rest of it, I'm a little nervous about what's really going on right here, so I'm going to click and come down there slightly to make sure that I've got that hair that's on that background right there as well. You do not want to run this thing any place where it's not supposed to be. So you can see right now I've got a huge part of the cap of her head right here where this thing is being run, and it doesn't need to be run because that is solid black. So to get rid of it there, you click on the minus tool right here at the top in the options palette, and now I can click and get rid of some of that. Because again, this tool will be, it can do just as much damage as it can do good. And I'm feeling like this part's actually going pretty good for me right here. So I'm going to uncheck Show Edge. I feel like I've got a lot of this really weird sort of, they call this spill or haloing that's actually happening on this image. We need to deal with that. But first off, we need to see how this is ultimately going to be output. Now, there's a series of refinements that exist down here that allow you to smooth all this work out, to feather it, to contrast it, to shift the edges in 9 out of 10 cases, if not 99 out of 100. All this, instead of saying global refinements, this should just say fuck your image up, because that's all it'll do. I'm going to avoid this right now. We are going to pass on that. We're also not going to use the radius tool right now. We just painted it in, and that's probably a better way to actually handle this. However, in the output that exists right down here, you have options. The first option, if you click on it, is a selection, and all that'll do is that whatever masking work we've done on this, it'll just load it as the marching ants. You'll have a selection going. That's probably not what we want to actually use in here. The next thing down would be a layer mask. So what it'll do is it'll actually put a layer mask on here. That part is actually an option for us. You can actually pick that. That would be fine. The next one down, new layer, is not fine, because what it'll do for a new layer is it'll create a new layer, it'll put the layer mask on it, and then it will remove the layer mask and apply it. That is a destructive move. You do not want to do that, because this is the only layer you've got of this girl. The next one down is new layer with a layer mask. That would also be an option. That'll keep your original guy intact. It will make a brand new one, and it will also give you a new layer mask on it. Finally, new document. Again, not something you want to do, because what it'll do is it'll create a brand new document of this. But again, it will apply the layer mask, which is a destructive move. There's no recovering from that. And then final, new document with a layer mask is also an option for you to use. But in our case, we're actually going to pick right here. I'm just going to leave it here as new layer, but I want you to see what changes. There's the last thing that we haven't dealt with here, and it's this, Decontaminate Colors. That's how we can try to deal with this spill issue that's existing around here. However, it is a destructive move. Watch my screen right here before you do it. What I want you to watch is what output happens to when I click on this. I'm going to click on this, and you'll see that that did not change, and that should have changed to new layer with layer mask. There's also a strength controller on this that'll allow you to crank this up or crank this down, and you can actually see the difference that that is. So if you uncheck that, which of those just seems better for you in terms of separating this girl out on that background? Is nobody doing this with me? Oh, sorry. Then do this now. Click on Decontaminate Colors.
Oh, it looks better.
Infinitely better, right? I'm still spotting a problem. Look at my screen right here. I'm spotting a problem right here. Look at this.
Yeah.
That is an issue right there that is wrong. So I'm going to go back to my Show Edge. I'm going to grab that Refine Edge tool. Oh, look at what has happened to your image. Look at what's happened to mine. That added something completely else to mine. Yeah, got rid of that. Okay. Okay, so turn on Decontaminate Colors. I think it makes for a much better image. However, if you click on Show Edge, this will show you what it's doing. The mask is actually controlling what you're seeing, but all of this other pigment that's actually being put in here is trying to resolve that spill issue. If you uncheck Decontaminate Colors, you'll see what I mean. So would you do that to your only copy of this image? No, that's why you always want to do this for a new layer with a layer mask. So I'm going to uncheck the Show Edge here, and simply I'm going to say OK to that. And you'll see what it's done. It's actually built a new layer on top. It's preserved my original one on the bottom, which is critical for me, because if you hold down the Shift key and you click on the mask, you'll see what it has done to the version of the girl, and that would not be a good thing to have that be your only copy of this. So in this case, you've always got the one that's underneath that is all still completely intact. So again, with this on, hold down the Shift key and click on the mask, and that is the Select and Mask workspace. Are there questions about this? Are we good on this, guys? There's what? it looks like it actually, I think you ended up creating a new document. So check one of your tabs, because I bet you if you go back in tab, you've got it.
Except
Go
for
back
this
here.
stuff.
So you can go back into it. It should remember where you were, I think. Let's see.
It shouldn't though.
Okay. No, you're right. You're right. So go all the way up to the top. And click on view and do hand skins. And you got it back again here. So you have to go through it all again. But it's this thing down here. Scroll down all the way to the bottom and under Decontaminate Colors.
I was
This
just
is
trying
what
to.
was wrong. It was new document with a layer mask. You want new layer with a layer mask. And then you'll be good. Okay, are there questions about this, guys? Are we good on this? Yes. Yeah, so it actually applies mask. Not what we wanted to do. So no, it's okay.
Okay, so
Just go
we're
through
in
again.
file.
Turn that eyeball off. Select this.
Watch me.
We're just gonna go back into this.
File export.
And it's this document right here. You said new layer.
Export.
No, just save it as a Photoshop file.
So guys, I'm going to show you again this really fast to show you what you don't want to do. All right, so this was the correct version of it right here. So I ended up with the correct version. I ended up with a new copy with my layer with a mask on it intact. This is what you don't want to do. I'm going to throw this guy away. I'm going to go turn this guy back on. I'm going to do the exact same thing I just did, select and mask. I'm not going to be quite as time consuming about it. I'm going to blow through this pretty quickly. So again, select the quick selection tool. You've got the girl part going. That's pretty good. Select the refine edge tool. Paint through all of this. Paint through all of that. Paint through all of this. Paint through all of that. Down here, check my edge to make sure that I got everything I think I needed to get. Missing stuff there. I got that. A little bit right there. A little bit right there. Turn my show edge off. So this is what people did by mistake. Remember I said you do not want to do this new layer and you don't want to do a new document, either one, because what it's going to do now is it's going to build the layer mask for me. I'm going to go ahead and say okay to that. Try that one more time. Output to new layer and say okay. And you'll see what it does. It's actually, this is a destructive move. If I turn this off, they call this destructive because it's removed the mask. It's actually, and you can also see this area right here. Remember I told you, you don't want to run this tool any place you don't want to run this tool. It'll do things like this, which are not going to help you out. So it just, you need to know that, again, there's no way to control this part of it. There's no way to change that part of it. This tool either is doing it or it's not doing it, and there's no in between. There's no strength. There's no doing it again. There's no any of that. Does this sort of make sense? We go on this? How would you fix this really quickly, the area that I'm sort of seeing here that I'm having a problem with? Do the what? Yeah, we're not in the same thing anymore at all. So this is, if I wanted to fix this, this is how I would do it. I'm going to turn on the, I'll leave that off because it's easier to see. I'm going to make a copy of the hair layer, the good one. I'm going to drag it up on top of this. I'm going to turn it on so it doesn't look like, so it looks complete right here. I need to put a layer mask on here. If you simply click the add layer mask, it puts on a white layer mask so everything is revealed. However, if you hit Command I, that mask will invert to black, and so now you can actually see it's hiding everything that was on that layer. I'm going to throw it away really quickly. Another option is to hold down the Option key when you click on that, and I'll actually put a black layer mask on as well. Then I'm going to hit the B key to get a brush. I'm going to make sure white is my foreground color. I'm going to make sure that this is a little bit, not a completely soft brush, but about a 30% soft. Normal blending mode, 100% opacity, 100% flow. And now, because I am got a mask here that's hiding good hair that didn't get fucked up, I can actually come in here and I can paint all of that hair back in. Make sense? Yes, and that's what's being revealed right here on the mask. You can see it, right? This gets better. If you paint out into here like that, you get the background back, right? I'm going to hit Command-Z to undo that. However, on this layer, I can say I want you to lock the transparency. That's what this little lock is right here, and that's why these things look like little checkerboard guys. So now if I pick on that lock transparency, I can't paint on this area right here. Nothing will happen. So now I can smack the hell out of this thing with a much bigger brush, and I can come back in. Now let's, oh, hang on. I'm painting on the image. I need to be on the mask. Oh, that's not going to actually do that. It's not going to lock the transparency because I'm doing it on a mask. There's no transparency in this image. Never mind. Never mind. Anyway, are we good on this? Questions about this? Okay, guys, I got 8 o'clock. If you can be back a quarter after, that'd be great. And let's finish this guy up.
So it said save it if you want to save it, and then I clicked OK. There was nowhere to save it on this message. Where do I save it?
Yeah, it's already been saved, and it actually just got absolutely worthlessly put to it. But that's okay. Yeah, we'll see if you have it. So to find it. Oh no, you're still able to save it here. So, but we need no. We need to give it a name.
Right.
Okay, so you need to change this. And what I typically do is, I would call it. This is a 15-inch. Okay, so I would call it MVP 15. So you know it's a Micro Pro 15. You can only get so many characters in here. That's why I abbreviate it. Underscore, and then put in your initials. Underscore, and then the date. So 2000, and October's good enough. You could do 2018, 10. Yeah, and you can probably get in today's date actually if you wanted to put that in. Yeah, perfect. And then hit save. And successfully say OK to that. And then to check it out, you can actually quit this program because it's done everything it's going to do. Come up to the Apple menu, come down to System Preferences. In System Preferences, click on the thing that looks like a whole bunch of, it's that icon right there. That's all of them now. Click on Displays. Pick, check a couple things out here first. That's right. Click on Night Shift really quick. I need to make sure that that's turned off. That's good. And then click on Color. So in Color, this is the thing that you just made. So now click on the color LCD above it. And then back on Viewers. If you were looking at something that wasn't quite so blue,
Right, yeah.
You would actually see it considerably more.
Cool.
Cool. And you're good to go?
Thank you.
Sure.
Do you know what time the cage closes?
10.